Hello everyone, and welcome. Let's get right into it. Our main character today is Arya Montgomery, a freelance graphic designer. This is the story of her struggle when her husband, Mason, demands she apologize to his female best friend for an emotional affair he was having. He gave her an ultimatum: apologize or I'll divorce you. She agreed. If you're curious about the story of how she delivered that apology, don't forget to subscribe and support this channel. For 5 years, Arya Montgomery believed she had a solid marriage. It was the kind of stable, comfortable life she had been taught to value. They lived in a 2-bedroom apartment in a quiet neighborhood, the kind with tree-lined sidewalks and neighbors who knew each other's names. She worked from home as a freelance graphic designer, a job that gave her flexibility and creative fulfillment. Mason, her husband, commuted downtown to a logistics company, a man of steady habits and predictable schedules. They split the bills. They cooked together on weekends. They talked about buying a house, maybe having kids, and traveling more once they'd saved enough. She remembered meeting him at a summer barbecue, standing by the drink cooler. He had a genuine smile that made her forget to be guarded. He listened. On their first date, he remembered she took her coffee with just a splash of cream, no sugar. He surprised her with bookstore dates because she'd once mentioned loving the quiet and the smell of new paper. He made her feel seen in a way she hadn't experienced before. Their wedding was small, held in a garden venue under strings of lights, attended only by the people who truly mattered. Mason had cried during his vows. Arya believed in those vows. She believed in the life they were building. Looking back, she would realize the illusion started to crack just 6 months into their marriage. Mason came home from work one evening radiating an excitement she hadn't seen in months. He sat her down on the couch, his eyes bright, and told her his college best friend, Scarlett, was moving back to town. He described her with a nostalgic warmth that seemed innocent at first. Scarlett was brilliant, charismatic, the kind of person who could sell anything to anyone. They had been part of a tight-knit group, staying up late solving the world's problems. Arya was genuinely happy for him. Everyone needed friends, especially the kind who knew you before. The first time she met Scarlett, at a dinner Mason organized, she understood his description. Scarlett was polished. She was a pharmaceutical sales rep, and she wore her success like a perfectly tailored blazer. Her hair was highlighted, her jewelry expensive but tasteful. She had a practiced, warm but impersonal smile. What struck Arya immediately, however, was the rhythm Mason and Scarlett fell into. Within minutes, they were laughing about professors Arya had never met and finishing each other's sentences. Arya sat there, smiling and nodding, trying to participate, but she felt less like a participant and more like an observer. It wasn't hostile, it was just dense. Their shared history created a language she didn't speak, a bubble she couldn't penetrate. Scarlett's husband, Elijah, was there too. He was a quiet accountant who seemed just as peripheral as Arya. At one point, while Mason and Scarlett were lost in a shared memory, Elijah caught Arya's eye. They shared a brief, silent look of mutual acknowledgement. They were the spouses, the audience. The boundary violations started small, so small that complaining about them felt petty. The first was the texting. They would be at a movie, the trailers just starting, and Mason's phone would buzz. He'd glance at it, type a quick reply, and put it away with an apologetic smile. 5 minutes later, it would buzz again. And again. By the time the movie started, he'd exchanged a dozen messages with Scarlett about a presentation she was nervous about. This pattern repeated. Their date nights were interrupted by texts about Scarlett's difficult clients. Their quiet weekend mornings were disrupted by long phone calls about Scarlett's minor marriage problems with Elijah. When Arya gently suggested that maybe he could text her back later, during their time, Mason's face clouded with disappointment. It was a subtle look, but it cut deep. It was the look of a man who thought his wife was failing a fundamental test of compassion. "She's just a friend, Arya," he'd say, his tone patient, as if explaining something simple to a child. "She's going through a lot. Real friends show up for each other." Then came the spare key. Arya found out when she walked out of her home office one Tuesday afternoon to find Scarlett sitting on her couch, shoes off, a mug of coffee in her hand. Mason was in the kitchen mid-conversation. Scarlett explained cheerfully that her own Wi-Fi had gone down and she needed to use theirs for a client call. She acted as if this was the most normal thing in the world. Arya stood in her own living room, feeling like an intruder. Later that night, when Scarlett had finally left, Arya tried to talk to Mason. She kept her voice calm. She suggested that perhaps they should establish a boundary. Maybe Scarlett could text before just letting herself in. Mason's response was immediate and defensive. She was in a bind, Arya. Was I supposed to tell her no? I don't understand why you're making this a big deal. He accused her of being unwelcoming, of not understanding friendship. That conversation became the template. Every time Arya tried to establish a boundary, Mason reframed it as her being unwelcoming, jealous, or insecure. She started to second-guess her own instincts. Was she being possessive? Was this just what mature adult friendships looked like? She felt herself shrinking, her voice getting smaller. She began to swallow her discomfort, forcing smiles while Scarlett's presence in their life grew larger and more intrusive. She felt increasingly invisible, like a ghost haunting her own home, while Mason's attention was pulled, magnetically and constantly, toward his best friend. The comfortable, stable life she had believed in was beginning to feel like a cage, and she was the only one who couldn't find the key. The breaking point arrived on a Wednesday morning in early December, 3 months after their disastrous 5th anniversary dinner. Arya was deep in the zone, working on a critical presentation for a major new client. It was the kind of project that could lead to a long-term contract, the kind that required absolute focus. She was fine-tuning a complex layout, her mouse clicking in a steady rhythm, when the screen went black. Not a flicker, not a warning, just an instant, silent death. She tapped the trackpad. Nothing. She held the power button. Nothing. A cold jolt of panic shot through her chest. She tried restarting, unplugging, every combination of keys she could remember. The laptop was a brick. The deadline, she thought, her heart hammering, was the end of the business day. She had 6 hours. 6 hours to somehow finish a presentation that now only existed in the cloud. Then she remembered. Mason's laptop. It was in his home office, where he'd left it that morning before heading downtown. He told her a dozen times, "What's mine is yours, Arya. Use it if you ever need to." They didn't have secrets, or so she believed. Relief, sharp and immediate, washed over her. She grabbed the laptop from his desk, powered it up, and logged into her cloud storage through his browser. The files loaded. She let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding and dove back into her work, her fingers flying across the keys, racing against the clock. She was an hour in, rebuilding the intricate design, when she realized she needed to reference their tax documents from the previous year. She was illustrating a chart on business expense categories for the client and needed to verify some figures. Mason handled all their administrative and financial paperwork. He was meticulous, keeping everything organized in folders on his laptop. She opened his file explorer and navigated to the Documents folder, expecting to see taxes or finances. Instead, her eyes caught on something else. Buried among random work files and downloads, in a way that suggested it was deliberately hidden but not well enough, was a folder labeled Personal Private. Her stomach clenched. The 2 words, side by side, felt like a warning siren. Personal Private. This from the man who said they had no secrets? This on the laptop he'd freely offered her? A part of her, the part that still wanted to believe in their comfortable life, screamed at her to close the window. Just find the tax forms, Arya. Finish your work. Don't look. She hesitated, her cursor hovering. Maybe it was a surprise for her. Birthday planning, a vacation he was researching. But his birthday had passed, and theirs wasn't a relationship of grand, secret surprises. It was one of steady, predictable comfort. Her hand trembled slightly. She clicked it. The folder wasn't empty. It contained hundreds of files, photos, screenshots, documents, all of them dated, spanning back 3 years. Her brain tried to categorize what she was seeing before the emotional impact could hit. Photos first. Mason and Scarlett, sitting across from each other at restaurant tables Arya didn't recognize. They were leaning in close, their heads almost touching, laughter on their faces that looked far more intimate than casual friendship. There were candid shots of Scarlett, her face glowing, clearly taken by Mason. Selfies of the 2 of them, his arm draped easily around her shoulders, both of them smiling as if they shared a precious, private world. Her client deadline was forgotten. The panic about her work evaporated, replaced by a cold, hollowing dread. Then, she saw the screenshots. Dozens and dozens of them. Text message conversations. With hands that had gone numb, she clicked on the first one. The timestamp was 2:17 a.m., from 6 months ago. It was from Scarlett. A long paragraph about feeling lost in her marriage to Elijah, about wondering if she'd made the right choices, about missing the connection she used to feel with people who truly understood her. Arya opened the next file. Mason's response, sent just minutes later. He validated every feeling. He shared his own thoughts about paths not taken, about connections that transcend normal friendship, about having regrets he couldn't articulate to most people. She clicked again, and again. She sat frozen at Mason's desk, watching a hidden relationship unfold in documented detail. These weren't just friendly check-ins. These were intimate, late-night confessions, the kind you only share with a partner. They were building an emotional life together, a life that excluded her completely. Then she found the message that would burn itself into her memory. It was from Scarlett, dated 8 months prior, right around the time Mason had started seeming more distant. Sometimes I wonder what life would have been like if we'd gotten together instead of just staying friends back in college. Do you ever think about that? Arya's breath caught in her throat. She dreaded seeing the reply, yet she couldn't stop herself. She opened the next file. Mason's response, sent at 2:20 a.m., while she was asleep in their bed just one room away. More than I probably should, but we made our choices. Doesn't mean I don't value what we have now. Arya read the words 3, 4, 5 times, praying they would rearrange themselves into something innocent. But the meaning was clear, devastatingly clear. Her husband had feelings for Scarlett that went far beyond friendship. He thought about a life where they were together, and he valued their secret, late-night connection. The air left her lungs. She couldn't breathe. She was standing in the wreckage of her marriage, and she hadn't even heard the explosion. Arya sat at that desk for what felt like hours, the client presentation completely abandoned, the past deadline unnoticed. The apartment was silent, save for the faint hum of the refrigerator. She was no longer crying. The initial shock, that sharp, breathless punch to the gut, had subsided. In its place, a creeping, icy numbness was setting in, a cold clarity that was almost more terrifying than the pain. She was watching her life, the one she had so carefully curated and believed in, dissolve in real time on her husband's laptop screen. The Pandora's box was open, and she couldn't stop herself from looking deeper. The betrayal wasn't just in the late-night messages. It was in the consistency. It was in the planning. Her mind, now sharp with adrenaline and dread, started connecting the evidence to the memories. She closed the screenshots folder and opened the online banking portal Mason kept bookmarked on his browser. They had a joint credit card, one they used for all shared expenses. She began to scroll through the statements, month after month, cross-referencing the dates with the photos she'd found. It didn't take long to find the pattern. Every single Tuesday afternoon for the past 2 years, a charge appeared from a place called the Riverbend Cafe. It was an upscale bistro downtown, the kind of place you'd go for a nice lunch, not a quick bite. He had never once mentioned this cafe, never suggested they go there. The charges were consistent, always between $50 and $70. Enough for 2 people. She opened Mason's digital calendar, which he kept synced across his devices. And there it was, plain as day, now that she knew what to look for. Every Tuesday at noon, a recurring 2-hour block simply labeled lunch meeting. No client name, no location, just a vague, protected space in his schedule. She compared the dates. The photos of him and Scarlett, leaning in close over wine glasses and appetizers, had been taken at those lunches. For 2 years, while she was at home working, eating leftovers at her desk, believing her husband was in a boring work meeting, he had been on a weekly 2-hour date. It was a standing ritual. This wasn't an occasional friendly catch-up. This was a deliberate, sustained, carefully planned deception. The full weight of the gaslighting hit her then, and it was suffocating. It was worse, somehow, than the affair itself. It was the realization that her pain had been his cover. Every time she had felt that knot in her stomach when he texted Scarlett at their dinner table, he had looked at her with disappointment. He had made her feel guilty. "You're being insecure, Arya. She's just a friend." Every time she'd expressed discomfort with Scarlett's constant presence, he had treated her like a problem to be managed. "I don't understand why you can't just be happy for me." She remembered their 5th anniversary dinner, just 3 months ago. She'd worn the emerald dress he once loved. He had spent half the meal on his phone, his face bathed in the blue light of the screen, his attention a million miles away. She had finally said his name, her voice small. "Mason, it's our anniversary." He had looked up, his expression one of genuine confusion, and told her Scarlett was having a crisis. He was just letting her know she wasn't alone. Arya dropped her head into her hands, but no tears came. She felt a bitter, acidic taste in her mouth. He wasn't alone. She was. She was the one who had been alone, sitting across from her husband at an expensive restaurant, becoming invisible while he provided emotional support to another woman. He hadn't just lied. He had actively, systematically, made her question her own sanity. He had used her trust as a shield. He had made her believe that her own accurate instincts were a personal failing, a flaw in her character that she needed to work on. He had positioned himself as the patient, reasonable partner, and her as the jealous, unstable wife. All of it, every sigh of frustration, every patient explanation, every disappointed look, had been a lie, a performance, a manipulation to protect his secret life. She had become the third wheel in her own marriage, and the evidence proving it was spread across the glowing screen in front of her. The sadness that had frozen her just moments before began to curdle, hardening into something else. It was rage, a cold, quiet, methodical rage. She looked at the clock. It was 3:45 p.m. He would be home in less than 3 hours, expecting dinner, expecting the normal, comfortable life he had so carefully maintained. He would walk through that door, kiss her on the cheek, and lie to her face, just as he had done for years. A new kind of resolve settled over her. He had called her paranoid. He had called her jealous. He had called her crazy. He had no idea how right she had been, and he had no idea what she was about to do with the truth. Arya didn't move from the desk. She let the rage settle, not as a hot, blinding fire, but as a cold, sharpening stone. She looked at the laptop, at the hundreds of files that represented her husband's secret heart. She needed to be smart. This couldn't be a hysterical, tear-filled accusation. That was what he expected. That was what he knew how to handle. He would just call her emotional, call her crazy, and the truth would be lost in the drama. No, this had to be different. She methodically found a USB drive in the desk drawer. She began to copy everything. Every photo, every screenshot, organized chronologically. Every credit card statement, with the Riverbend Cafe charges highlighted. She even found the email receipts for gifts he bought Scarlett, a $200 silk scarf for her birthday, a bottle of expensive champagne for her promotion. Gifts he had never mentioned. She backed it all up, then created a second backup in a secure cloud account he couldn't access. When she was finished, she sat back. The apartment was quiet. The afternoon light had shifted, casting long shadows across the room. She looked at the clock. 5:15 p.m. He would be home soon. She decided, in that moment, to give him one last chance to tell the truth. She would give him the normal evening he expected. She went to the kitchen and started preparing dinner. Chicken with roasted vegetables, one of his favorites. She set the table, put on a playlist of quiet jazz, and waited. At 6:28 p.m., right on schedule, his key turned in the lock. "Hey," he called out, his voice tired from work. "Something smells good." He walked in, loosened his tie, and came over to kiss her cheek. It was a routine, practiced gesture, and Arya had to fight the urge to flinch. She felt the cold press of his lips against her skin, and it felt like the touch of a stranger. "Rough day?" she asked, her voice surprisingly steady. "You have no idea," he sighed, dropping his briefcase. "Logistics are a nightmare. How was yours? Did you get that presentation done?" The question was so mundane, so wrapped in their shared, false reality, that it almost knocked her off balance. "My laptop died," she said, turning back to the stove. It was a challenge. He grunted in sympathy and went to the bedroom to change. He emerged 10 minutes later in sweatpants and a t-shirt, poured himself a glass of red wine, and settled into his usual spot on the couch, phone already in hand. Arya watched him, watched his thumb swipe across the screen, watched the tiny, almost imperceptible smile that touched his lips as he typed. He was probably texting her. Now, in their living room, right in front of his wife. She brought their plates to the coffee table. They ate. He talked about his work, about a problem at the warehouse. She nodded, asked the right questions, and felt a chilling sense of detachment, as if she were floating near the ceiling, watching two actors perform a scene. When they were finished, she took a steadying breath. I had to use your laptop today, she said, her voice quiet, neutral. Yeah? No problem, he murmured, his eyes still on his phone. Find what you needed. I was looking for the tax documents, she continued, and I found a folder, labeled Personal Private, that got his attention. His thumb stopped moving. He looked up from his phone, his expression shifting from casual boredom to a sudden, sharp alertness. What? I opened it, Mason. She watched the color drain from his face. She saw the flicker of raw, unguarded panic in his eyes. He put his phone down. For 3 solid seconds, he was silent, his mind clearly racing, processing, calculating. Then, just as quickly as it had appeared, the panic was gone, replaced by something harder. The mask of the patient husband snapped firmly into place, but this time it was augmented by a new, colder mask, one of righteous indignation. You went through my private files? His voice was low, laced with disbelief and accusation. Arya, what the hell? Those are my personal things. You had no right. The audacity of it, the sheer, immediate deflection, was stunning. He wasn't apologizing. He wasn't ashamed. He was angry. At her. You're right, Arya said, and his eyes widened slightly, surprised by her agreement. I had no right, but I did, and I saw everything. The texts, the photos from your secret Tuesday lunches, the receipts for her gifts. She laid the words out, one by one, like bricks in a wall. She expected him to break, to finally admit it. Instead, he stood up. He began to pace, running a hand through his hair in a gesture of pure frustration. This is exactly what I'm talking about, he exclaimed, his voice rising. This is the jealousy, the insecurity. You can't handle me having one meaningful friendship outside of this marriage, so you go snooping? You invent some narrative in your head. Invent, she repeated, her own voice rising despite her best efforts. I read the messages, Mason. I saw the pictures. You told her you think about what your life would be like if you had gotten together. You're twisting things, he shot back, pointing a finger at her. You're taking private conversations completely out of context. Scarlett and I are friends. We talk about deep things. We support each other. That's what real friendship is. Just because you don't have that doesn't make it an affair. It was the gaslighter's masterpiece. In the span of 30 seconds, he had successfully reframed his betrayal as her inadequacy. His infidelity was her insecurity. His deception was her jealousy. His secret lunches were her lack of real friendships. The argument raged for 2 hours. It was a circular, exhausting, maddening dance. Every piece of evidence she presented, he deflected with a new accusation against her. The late-night texts. She was having a hard time. I was being a supportive friend, Arya. Is that a crime now? The weekly lunches at Riverbend Cafe? It's a catch-up. I didn't tell you because I knew you'd react exactly like this. You prove my point. Though I think about it more than I should, it was a hypothetical. A joke. My God, you really can't let anything go, can you? Arya felt like she was drowning, suffocating under the weight of his denials. He was so practiced, so convincing, that for a terrifying second, she almost doubted the black and white proof she had copied to the USB drive in her pocket. This was his true talent, not logistics. This, the ability to look his wife in the eye, surrounded by the wreckage of his lies, and make her feel like she was the one holding the hammer. He was exhausted, he said. He was tired of having to defend a perfectly innocent friendship from her constant paranoia. And then he delivered the blow that would change everything. He stopped pacing. He stood in the middle of their living room, his arms crossed, his jaw set with a look of profound, weary disappointment. He was no longer angry. He was something far worse, a man who believed he was being persecuted, a man who had reached his final, patient conclusion. "You know what the real problem is, Arya," he said, his voice dropping into a tone of patronizing calm. "It's not me. It's not my friendship with Scarlet. It's this." He gestured vaguely at her, at the cooling plates of food, at the entire, messy scene. "It's your suspicion. Your attitude about her." Arya stared at him, speechless. The audacity of it was breathtaking. He was being confronted with hard, irrefutable evidence of a years-long emotional affair, and he was, once again, making her the problem. "She has been nothing but kind to you," Mason continued, warming to his argument, his voice gaining the strength of absolute conviction. "She has tried to include you. She has tried to be your friend. And since the day she moved back, you have treated her with coldness, with suspicion, with this passive-aggressive hostility. Mason, you—" "No, let me finish," he said, holding up a hand. "You think you're the only one who's hurt? She knows you don't like her. She's told me. She's cried about it. It hurts her feelings that you're so jealous you can't accept that I have a meaningful friendship. She's the one who's been suffering through your insecurity for months." Arya's brain struggled to process the logic. It was a complete inversion of reality. He was the betrayer. She was the betrayed. But in his narrative, Scarlet, the woman he was having late-night, intimate conversations with, was the true victim. And Arya was the abuser. "What are you saying?" she whispered, though she already knew. The cold dread in her stomach told her exactly where this was going. "I'm saying," he said, his voice hard and clear, "that if we are going to fix this, you owe her an apology." The words hung in the air, heavy and poisonous. The background jazz music suddenly seemed loud and inappropriate. Arya could hear the faint hum of the kitchen light. He couldn't be serious. He couldn't. This was some new, desperate, manipulative tactic. He was demanding she apologize to his affair partner. For what? For noticing? For finding the proof? For being the wife who was in the way? "You want me to apologize to Scarlet," she repeated, each word landing like a stone. "Yes," he said, his expression unflinching. "That's the only way forward. You need to apologize for your jealousy, for snooping through my private things, for taking our friendship and twisting it into something ugly. You need to apologize for hurting her." He saw the stunned, broken look on her face and mistook it for surrender. He saw her silence as weakness, as the cracking of her resolve. He believed, in that moment, that he had finally won. He had called her bluff, and now he would dictate the terms of her surrender. "I'm serious, Arya," he said, his voice dropping as if sealing a deal. "This is the line. You will go to her, and you will apologize. You will make this right with her. If you can't do that, if you can't even admit that your jealousy is the real problem here, then I don't know what we're doing." He took a breath, his eyes cold. "Apologize to Scarlet, or I'll divorce you." The ultimatum was delivered. It filled the room, sucking all the air out. Mason stood there, righteous and unmoving, the perfect picture of a wronged man, fully believing he had backed her into a corner. He was forcing her to choose, validate his affair and save her marriage, or keep her pride and lose everything. And in that moment, something inside Arya Montgomery snapped. It wasn't loud. It was a clean, sharp, silent break. The swirling storm of hurt, the desperate sadness, the fear of losing her marriage, it all vanished. It was gone. In its place, a cold, vast, and terrifying clarity settled over her. She looked at the man she had loved, the man who had cried at their wedding, the man who was now threatening to leave her unless she apologized to his mistress. She realized he wasn't calling her bluff. He wasn't trying to save their marriage. He was trying to control it. He was trying to break her, to force her to co-sign his gaslighting, to make her a willing participant in her own humiliation. He thought he had given her an impossible choice. He had no idea he had just handed her the perfect weapon. The silence in the room was absolute. Mason's words, "Apologize, or I'll divorce you," echoed in the dead air. He stood there, arms crossed, a portrait of unshakable, righteous conviction. He was waiting for the collapse. He was waiting for the tears, the begging, the desperate, broken pleas of a wife terrified of being abandoned. He was waiting for her to say, "No, please, don't leave me. I'll do anything." Arya looked at him. She didn't see the man she had married. She didn't see the man who had cried at their wedding or who remembered how she took her coffee. She saw a hollow man, a bully who had just pulled his final, most desperate lever of control, entirely convinced of his own power. And she felt nothing. The fear was gone. The love had been extinguished. All that remained was the cold, hard certainty of the truth. She let the silence stretch, just long enough for the panic to start to flicker in his eyes. Just long enough for him to wonder if he had miscalculated. Then she spoke. Her voice was not the one he was used to. It wasn't warm, or angry, or broken. It was calm. It was level. It was the voice of a stranger. "Fine." Mason blinked. "What?" "I said fine," Arya repeated, meeting his gaze without flinching. "You're right. She deserves an apology. I'll do it." The relief that flooded his face was so immediate, so profound, it was almost comical. His entire posture changed. His shoulders, which had been tense for a fight, visibly relaxed. He had won. He had pushed his wife to the brink, and she had bent. "Arya, that's—" he stammered, a smug, triumphant smile beginning to form. "That's the right choice. I knew you'd see reason. This is good. This is how we move forward. But I want to do it properly," Arya continued, her voice still holding that same unnerving calm. "You're right. I've caused a lot of pain. It shouldn't be a text. It should be in person. At her house." Mason nodded enthusiastically, his face glowing with victory. "Yes, absolutely. That's perfect. That's exactly what I was thinking. I'll text her right now. We can set it up for this weekend. This is so good, Arya. I'm proud of you for being mature enough to fix this." Proud. The word almost made her laugh. He was proud of her for surrendering to his gaslighting. "And Elijah," Arya added as if it were an afterthought. "Scarlett's husband. He should be there, too." Mason paused, momentarily confused. "Elijah? Why?" "Because," Arya said, crafting the lie with effortless precision, "if I'm going to apologize for misinterpreting your friendship and being jealous, I think both of our spouses should be in the room to hear it. It's about transparency. It's about rebuilding trust. For all of us. I want us all to be on the same page, so we can finally move past this." It was the perfect bait. He saw it not as a threat, but as the ultimate sign of her submission. She wasn't just apologizing. She was willing to be transparent, to include everyone. She was curing her own jealousy right in front of him. "You're right," he said, his voice thick with genuine approval. That's incredibly mature of you, Arya." "God, yes. This is the breakthrough we've needed." He grabbed his phone, his thumbs flying across the screen as he eagerly texted Scarlett to arrange the stage for his wife's humiliation. Arya watched him, her expression placid. He was so busy celebrating his victory, so blinded by his own arrogance, that he didn't see the truth. He wasn't arranging her surrender. He was arranging his. Later that night, Mason fell asleep almost instantly. He slept the deep, peaceful, untroubled sleep of a man who believes he has successfully navigated a crisis and restored order to his world. He was a victor, resting on his laurels. Arya lay beside him in the darkness, wide awake, listening to the sound of his steady breathing. She waited 1 hour, then 2. At 3 a.m., when the entire building was wrapped in profound silence, she slipped out of bed. She didn't turn on a light. She padded barefoot into the home office, the blue light of Mason's still-open laptop illuminating her face. She was no longer a wife. She was an architect, and she was about to build her case. She plugged in the USB drive, and then, with methodical, patient, and unwavering precision, she began her work. She downloaded everything. Every screenshot of every 2 a.m. text. Every photo from every Secret Tuesday lunch. Every credit card statement with the charges from the Riverbend Cafe highlighted in digital red. Every email receipt for every secret gift. She didn't just copy them. She organized them. She created folders labeled late-night conversations, financial deceit, and gifts. She arranged the text messages in chronological order, creating a narrative of the affair that was impossible to deny. She was not just collecting files. She was building an arsenal. She was crafting the unshakable, irrefutable truth. She made 3 copies, one on the USB drive, one on a new, secure cloud account she created, and a third on a separate, hidden drive. When she was finished, the first pale, gray light of dawn was beginning to touch the window. She had not slept. She felt no fatigue. She felt only a cold, sharp, and exhilarating focus. Mason had demanded an apology, and she was going to give him one. She was going to deliver the most honest, devastating, and well-documented apology he had ever, in his entire life, received. The next 2 days were a surreal performance. Mason, buoyed by his perceived victory, was in an excellent mood. He treated Arya with a kind of gentle, condescending affection, the way a parent might treat a child who has finally stopped throwing a tantrum. He was proud of her. He told her so multiple times. He was so glad she was being mature about this. Scarlett was really touched you wanted to do this in person, he said on Thursday evening, his tone bright and magnanimous. She said it's for the best. And she agreed. Having Elijah there is a great idea. Total transparency. It's a fresh start for all 4 of us. Arya, in turn, played her part to perfection. She was quiet, contrite, and slightly fragile. She allowed him to believe she was humbled, perhaps a little ashamed, and focused on repairing the damage she had caused. On Friday morning, he even tried to coach her. He sat at the kitchen counter while she made coffee, his expression earnest. So when you talk to her, I think it's important you acknowledge that your insecurity, twisted things, he advised gently. Just let her know you understand our friendship is just a friendship and that you're sorry for making her feel unwelcome. Arya just nodded, her eyes downcast, stirring her coffee. You're right. I'll make sure to say that. I just want this to be over. Exactly, he beamed, reaching across the counter to pat her hand. That's the spirit. Saturday night, we clear the air, and then we're past this. We can finally get back to normal. She smiled faintly. I'll be ready. The apology was set. Saturday, 7 p.m. Their house. The final piece of his humiliation, which he had so eagerly arranged himself. But Arya's own plan was not yet complete. She was the architect, and she knew that for the structure to hold, every support had to be in place. She had her evidence, and she had the stage. Now, she needed to ensure her audience was prepared. On Friday afternoon, she waited until Mason left the apartment to run errands. He was picking up a nice bottle of wine to bring to Scarlett and Elijah's, a gesture of goodwill he insisted they make. The moment the front door clicked shut, Arya moved to the living room. Her heart, for the first time all week, began to hammer against her ribs. This was the most dangerous part. This was the one move that could make the entire plan implode if she handled it wrong. Her hands were shaking, just slightly, as she pulled up Elijah's contact information. Mason had it saved in his phone, shared to their cloud contacts from some long-ago dinner party. She had probably spoken less than 100 words to the man in all the years she'd known him. He was the quiet husband in the background, the one who, like her, seemed to observe more than he participated. He was the man who had shared that silent, knowing look with her at that first, awful dinner. She was counting on that look. She was counting on the fact that he was just as invisible and just as suspicious as she had been. She pressed call before she could second-guess herself. It rang once, twice. On the third ring, he answered, his voice professional and slightly clipped, the voice of an accountant who was likely still at work. This is Elijah Pierce. Elijah, she said, her voice steady, all traces of her tremor gone. This is Arya Montgomery, Mason's wife. There was a silence on the other end of the line. It stretched for 3-4 seconds. She could almost hear him processing, switching tracks from work to this strange, unexpected call. Arya, he said finally. His voice was cautious. Is everything okay? I'm calling about Saturday, she said, keeping her tone flat and informational. Mason has arranged for me to come to your house tomorrow evening. To apologize to Scarlett. Another longer silence. This one was heavier, filled with unasked questions. Apologize, he repeated, and she could hear the confusion in his voice. For what? Here it was, the moment of truth. She couldn't show her hand. She had to give him the lie, wrapped in just enough truth to make him look closer. He says I've been misinterpreting their friendship, that my jealousy has hurt her feelings. He insisted I do it in person, and that you both be there. She let that hang in the air, She had just handed him a perfect mirror of what he had likely been experiencing for years. Jealousy. Misinterpreting. Just a friendship. When Elijah spoke again, the professional distance was gone. His voice was low and tight. I see. And Mason insisted on this. He did, Arya said. I just wanted to call you directly, to make sure you'd be home. I wouldn't want to waste the trip. I'll be there, he said. The words were simple, but the tone was anything but. The confusion was gone, replaced by a cold, hard note of understanding. He knew. He didn't know what, but he knew this wasn't an apology. It was something else. Good, Arya said. She took a small breath. Elijah, I also wanted to say, I think there are some things you deserve to know. Things that I've only just found proof of. She heard him inhale sharply. Proof. I'll see you tomorrow night, Elijah, she said softly and hung up the phone. She sat in the silent apartment. It was done. The final piece was in place. She hadn't just invited an audience. She had alerted her primary witness. Elijah wouldn't be a passive observer, blindsided by the drama. He would be an ally, waiting for the evidence he, too, had probably been searching for. The stage was set. The actors were in position. And she, the director, was ready for the curtain to rise. Saturday night arrived with a cool, clear sky. Mason dressed with the care of a man heading to a pleasant dinner, choosing a pressed button-down shirt and nice jeans. He was cheerful, even humming as he located the expensive bottle of wine he bought, placing it in a tasteful gift bag. He was the picture of a husband relieved to be putting a difficult chapter behind him. Arya was a study in contrasts. She dressed in a simple, dark navy dress. It was understated, respectful, and completely unremarkable. It was the armor of a woman who wanted to be invisible, to let her words be the only thing the room remembered. She was quiet, but her hands were steady. The nervous, fragile wife he'd been coaching all week was gone, replaced by a woman of still, cold purpose. Mason, blinded by his own narrative, mistook her silence for solemn, contrite nerves. You ready, hon? He asked, patting her on the back. Don't be nervous. This is a good thing. It's a fresh start. I'm ready, she said, her voice even. The drive to Scarlet and Elijah's house was filled with Mason's cheerful, one-sided chatter about a new project at work. Arya stared out the window, watching the suburban houses slide by, each one a neat little box of secrets. When they pulled into the driveway, she noted the lights were on, the house glowing with a welcoming warmth that felt like a trap. Mason rang the doorbell. The door swung open almost immediately. Scarlett stood there, and she was a vision of magnanimous forgiveness. She wore expensive-looking jeans, a cream-colored silk blouse, and her highlighted hair fell in perfect, casual waves. Her smile was wide, warm, and dripping with smug superiority. She was the gracious queen, prepared to accept the apology of her vanquished, jealous rival. Mason! Arya! Come in, she said, her voice a theatrical coo. She took the wine from Mason with a little laugh. Oh, you didn't have to. I'm just so glad we're doing this. Clearing the air it's just so important. She hugged Mason, a lingering hug that Arya noted was far too intimate. Then she turned to Arya, her arms open. Arya did not move, simply offering a tight, polite smile. Scarlett, unfazed, dropped her arms and gracefully ushered them inside. The living room was staged for the event. Wine glasses were already set out on the polished coffee table, alongside a meticulously arranged cheese board. It was a performance of casual, sophisticated friendship. Elijah emerged from the kitchen, a quiet shadow in his wife's bright spotlight. He looked tired, but as his eyes met Arya's, she saw something else, a sharp, questioning alertness. He nodded once, a curt, private acknowledgement. He was ready. Please sit down, Scarlett chirped, gesturing to the plush sofa. They arranged themselves. Scarlett and Mason sat on the sofa, a little too close, a united front. Arya and Elijah took the two matching armchairs, facing them. A barrier of cheese and wine sat between them. The small talk was excruciating. Mason and Scarlett carried it, laughing about some shared memory from work. Arya sat in silence, her hands folded in her lap. Elijah said nothing, his eyes fixed on Arya, waiting. Finally, Mason, the proud ringmaster, cleared his throat, and gave Arya an encouraging nod. Han, he said, his voice gentle. I think Arya has something she'd like to say. Scarlett's smile softened into a look of perfect, patient empathy. She leaned forward, her hands clasped, ready to receive her tribute. Arya, she said softly, it's okay. I'm just glad we can finally talk. The room fell silent. All three of them were looking at her, waiting. Arya took a slow, deliberate breath. She did not look at Mason. She looked directly at Scarlett, holding her gaze until the woman's practiced smile began to feel strained. Scarlett, Arya began, her voice clear and strong, cutting through the staged quiet. Mason was right. He insisted I come here and apologize to you. And he was right. I do owe you an apology. She paused. The relief in the room was palpable. Mason beamed, his face glowing with pride. He reached over and squeezed Scarlett's arm, a tiny, shared gesture of victory. Scarlett's expression deepened into one of profound, magnanimous relief. But, Arya continued, and the word hung in the air like a blade. The smiles froze. Mason's hand dropped from Scarlett's arm. I'm not here to apologize for my jealousy, Arya said, her voice dropping, gaining a new icy weight. I'm here to apologize for staying silent for so long. I apologize for allowing you and my husband to carry on a 3-year emotional affair and letting him convince me I was the crazy one for noticing. Arya! Mason exploded, leaping to his feet. What the hell are you doing? That is not what we agreed. I apologize, Arya continued, ignoring him completely, her voice rising to speak over his protests. She turned her body, deliberately, to face the other person in the room. Her eyes locked on Elijah. And I apologize to you, Elijah, because you deserve to know the truth. You deserve to know that your wife and my husband have been meeting for secret lunches every Tuesday for the past 2 years at the Riverbend Cafe. You deserve to know they've been exchanging intimate, late-night texts about how they wish they'd gotten together in college. You lying *TCH. Scarlett shrieked, her mask of perfection shattering into 1,000 pieces. Elijah, don't listen to her. She's jealous. She's insane. Am I? Arya said, her voice terrifyingly calm. She pulled out her phone. Mason insisted we have total transparency. So let's be transparent. She stood up, walked past the coffee table, and handed her phone to Elijah, whose face had gone ashen. This, she said to him, is a folder of their 2 a.m. conversations. This is a spreadsheet of the credit card charges. This is the email receipt for the $250 silk scarf Mason bought her for her birthday. The one you probably thought was a gift from a client. It's all there. I just thought you deserve to know. Elijah took the phone with a trembling hand. He didn't look at his wife. He didn't look at Mason, who was now screaming, Arya, you're destroying everything. He just looked at the screen. He scrolled. Once. Twice. The color drained from his face as he read the messages, the ones Arya had found. The more than I probably should message. Scarlett was sobbing now, ugly, panic sobs. Elijah, please. It's not. He's just a friend. She's twisting it. Elijah kept scrolling, his face a mask of stone. He read for what felt like an eternity. Then, he slowly looked up. He didn't look at Mason, who was red-faced and sputtering. He didn't look at Arya. He looked at his wife, who was now openly weeping, her perfect facade in ruins. He said only 2 words, his voice so quiet, so dead, it silenced the entire chaotic room. How long? Elijah didn't look up from the phone. He just kept scrolling, his face a white mask of devastation as Scarlett's sobs devolved into desperate, ugly wails. It's not what it looks like. Elijah, please. He's just a friend. She's making it up. Mason, his face a blotchy, furious red, finally found his voice. He lunged, not at Elijah but at Arya. You're done, he seethed, jabbing a finger in her face. You've destroyed everything. You took private conversations and you twisted them. You're a vindictive, jealous. I'm done, Arya said, her voice cutting through his rage with the clean, sharp edge of a scalpel. She took a step back, out of his reach. Her eyes met his, and for the first time, he saw no fear, no hurt, and no love. He saw only a void. You demanded I apologize for the truth, she said, her voice terrifyingly level. I just did. You told me to do it in front of Elijah. I did. You threatened me with divorce if I didn't comply. She picked up her purse from the floor. Consider this my answer. She turned to Elijah, who was still frozen, his world collapsing in the palm of his hand. Elijah, I've sent copies of everything to your personal email, she said, her voice softening with a shred of pity for this man, the collateral damage in her husband's war. All the screenshots, all the financials. You deserve to make your own decisions with the truth. Arya! Mason bellowed, his voice cracking with a mixture of rage and a new, dawning panic. Don't you dare walk out that door. We are not finished. I am, she said. She turned and walked to the front door. She didn't run. She walked with the steady, measured pace of someone who had just finished a job. Behind her, the room was a symphony of chaos. Scarlett was screaming at Elijah, Please, baby, say something. Mason was screaming her name. Arya! Arya! You can't just leave. She opened the front door and stepped out into the cool, silent October night. The suburban street was peaceful, a stark contrast to the inferno she had just unleashed. She closed the door behind her, the sound of Scarlett's wailing muffled, but not silenced. She walked down the pathway, her heels clicking on the pavement, and didn't look back. She pulled out her phone, her hands perfectly steady, and opened a rideshare app. A car arrived in 4 minutes. The driver was playing quiet classical music. Rough night? He asked cheerfully as she slid into the back seat. You could say that, Arya murmured, and turned to look out the window. The 30-minute drive back to her apartment was a strange, suspended vacuum. The adrenaline from the confrontation began to fade, and she was left, not with regret, but with a vast, hollow, and profound sense of relief. It was the feeling of a weight she hadn't known she was carrying, the weight of his lies, his gaslighting, his constant, subtle dismissals, finally being set down. She had been carrying it for years. Now she was free. She let herself into the quiet apartment. It looked the same. His shoes were by the door. His jacket was on the hook. But it all felt like a stage set for a play that had just ended. She went to the kitchen, poured herself a large glass of red wine, and sat on the couch. And she waited. She knew he was coming. The performance wasn't over. Not quite. At 11:47 p.m., his key slammed into the lock. The door flew open and hit the wall with a crash. Mason stumbled in. He was a different man from the one she had left. His face was ravaged. His eyes were red and swollen. He had been crying. His carefully styled hair was a mess from where he'd been running his hands through it. He looked, for the first time, utterly defeated. He stood in the doorway, staring at her as she sat on the couch, calmly sipping her wine. How could you? He whispered, his voice raw. How could you humiliate me like that? In front of him, Arya said nothing. She just looked at him, waiting. You didn't just end our marriage tonight, Arya, he said, his voice rising, gathering strength from his anger. You destroyed his. You destroyed Scarlett. You destroyed everything. He was still doing it. Even now, even after all of it, he was making her the one who had destroyed everything, as if his affair were a passive, innocent thing that she had aggressively ruined. You're a monster, he spat. A cold, vindictive. Are you done? She asked, her voice flat. Her lack of response, her refusal to be drawn into another fight, seemed to break him. The anger, his last line of defense, suddenly collapsed. His face crumpled. He took a stumbling step toward her, his hands outstretched, his expression shifting from rage to a desperate, panicked pleading. Arya, please, he begged. And this was the man she had never seen. Look! I messed up. Okay. I know. I made mistakes. I let it get too far. I did. But we can fix this. We can go to counseling. I'll stop talking to her. I'll delete her number. Right now. I'll do anything. He was crying now, real tears. Please, Arya. It's 5 years. You're my wife. Don't throw this all away over a stupid mistake. Please don't leave me. He was bargaining. He had finally, truly lost control, and he was desperate to get it back. He thought this was her final test. He thought she just needed to see him beg. Arya stood up slowly. She set her wine glass down on the coffee table. She looked at him, at this broken, pleading stranger who had, just that morning, coached her on how to apologize to his mistress. "I'm filing for divorce, Mason," she said. His face went slack. "What?" No, you're not. You're just angry. You're emotional." "I'm done," she said. She turned and walked toward their bedroom. "Arya!" "Wait," he scrambled after her, grabbing her arm. "We can fix this." She pulled her arm from his grasp, her motion sharp and final. She walked into the bedroom, closed the door, and turned the lock. The click was loud in the silent apartment. It was the first real boundary she had ever set with him. And it was their last. She heard him on the other side. First, he tried the handle. Then he banged on it. "Arya! Open the door. Let's talk about this. You're being hysterical." Then, the pleading returned. "Please, baby, please, don't do this." She slid down to the floor, her back against the cool, solid wood of the door. She listened to him rage and plead and bargain, and finally, after what felt like an hour, she heard a sound of utter despair. A long, defeated sigh, and then the sound of him sliding down the door on the other side. She sat there, in the dark, listening to the quiet sobs of her husband on the other side of the locked door. She did not cry. She just breathed. She stayed there until the first gray light of dawn crept through the blinds. She heard him, at some point, get up and move to the couch. When the sun was fully up, she stood, her legs stiff. She picked up her phone. She didn't call her mother. She didn't call a friend. She opened her browser and typed in a name. Victoria Brennan, the best and most ruthless divorce lawyer in the city. Arya slept on the floor of the bedroom, her back against the door. When the sun came up, she rose, her body stiff. She showered, packed a small overnight bag, and opened the bedroom door. Mason was asleep on the couch, his body contorted, his face puffy and streaked with dried tears. He looked like a child. Arya looked at him for a long, final moment, feeling nothing but the hollow echo of a life that was already over. She walked out of the apartment, closing the door softly behind her, and did not look back. She called Victoria Brennan at 9:01 a.m. Victoria's office was on the 34th floor of a steel and glass tower downtown. The view was panoramic, impersonal, and powerful. Victoria herself was a woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and an even sharper gray suit. She listened to Arya's story without interruption, her expression neutral. When Arya finished, Victoria leaned back in her leather chair. "Emotional affairs are difficult, Mrs. Montgomery," she said, her voice crisp. "They are," he said. She said, "nightmare of interpretation. It's a messy, expensive fight. What proof do you have besides your memory of the confrontation?" Arya said nothing. She simply reached into her purse, pulled out the USB drive, and slid it across the polished mahogany desk. "He called me jealous, paranoid, and hysterical," Arya said. "I'm not. I'm just thorough." Victoria plugged the drive into her computer. For 20 minutes, the only sound in the office was the quiet click, click, click of her mouse. She opened the chronological texts. She opened the Riverbend Cafe financial spreadsheet. She opened the email receipts for the scarf and the wine. Finally, she looked up, and for the first time, she smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was the smile of a predator that has just been handed a prime cut of meat. "Mrs. Montgomery," Victoria said. "This isn't a he said," she said. "This is a he said, and I have the receipts. Your husband's attempt at gaslighting has provided us with a textbook case of marital misconduct and dissipation of assets. He won't just be fighting you. He'll be fighting this." She tapped the USB drive. "He has no idea, does he?" "He has no idea," Arya confirmed. The divorce was, as Victoria had predicted, brutal and fast. Mason, upon receiving the initial petition from Victoria's office, which included a polite, itemized appendix of the evidence, completely fell apart. His attempts to control the narrative, to paint Arya as the unstable, vindictive wife, evaporated the moment his own lawyer saw the file. He was advised to settle, and to settle quickly, before more details became a matter of public record. The settlement was profoundly in Arya's favor. She kept the apartment. She kept the majority of their savings, successfully argued by Victoria as compensation for the dissipation of marital assets on his affair. Mason, trapped and exposed, signed everything. He was a man desperate to stop the bleeding. 2 weeks after the papers were first filed, Arya received an unexpected email. It was from Elijah. The subject line was simple: "Thank you." He wrote that he had also filed for divorce. The evidence she had sent to his email had made the process, in his words, unavoidably clear. Scarlett, like Mason, had no defense against the black and white truth. He asked if, when she had time, she would be willing to meet for coffee. He clarified that it wasn't a date. He just wanted to talk to the only other person on earth who would understand. They met at a small, bright cafe, the opposite of the dark, expensive Riverbend. Elijah looked different. The quiet, resigned exhaustion that had always hung around him was gone. He looked tired, yes, but he also looked present. For the first hour, they just compared notes, survivors of the same shipwreck. He told her about years of Scarlett's emotional crises that always seemed to coincide with Mason. He spoke of a constant, vague feeling of being the least important person in his own home. He, too, had been called too sensitive and not trusting. The worst part, Elijah said, stirring his coffee, wasn't the lie. It was that she made me doubt myself. I thought I was the problem. I thought I was failing her. He called me crazy, Arya said, her voice quiet. He told me my jealousy was hurting Scarlett. He demanded I apologize. Elijah's eyes widened, and he let out a short, bitter laugh. My God, they really were the same person, weren't they? They learned, through their shared, quiet grapevine, what happened to Mason and Scarlett. It was predictable. With their respective spouses gone, and the thrill of the forbidden, secret connection removed, they attempted to build a real relationship. The fantasy collapsed under the weight of reality. The relationship lasted exactly 4 months. The deep emotional connection, they shared over 2 a.m. text and translate well to arguments about bills and whose turn it was to take out the trash. Scarlett, it turned out, missed the financial security Elijah had provided. Mason, now living in a small studio apartment and paying hefty legal fees, was no longer the exciting, powerful man who rescued her. He was just a man. Their shared trauma of their divorces didn't bond them, it just made them bitter. They broke up, not with a bang, but with a sad, resentful whimper. Arya and Elijah, however, kept meeting for coffee. Every Wednesday. What started as shared trauma slowly, cautiously evolved. They talked about their work, about old movies they loved, about hiking trails. It was a friendship built not on fantasy or secrets, but on the most brutal and unshakable honesty. 6 months after her divorce was finalized, Elijah suggested they go to dinner. It was slow. It was careful. They were 2 people who were relearning how to trust, and they were doing it together, on the solid ground of truth. Arya still lived in the apartment. She had redecorated, exorcising the ghosts of her marriage. The walls were new colors. Her own artwork hung where his bland prints used to be. It was, for the first time, entirely her space. One evening, she was working late on a new design project, a glass of wine at her elbow, quiet music playing. She thought about that night. She thought about Mason's ultimatum. Apologize, or I'll divorce you. He had believed he was giving her a choice between humiliation and destruction. He never, in his wildest, most arrogant dreams, imagined she would be strong enough to choose both. He thought he was forcing her to bow. He didn't understand that women like her don't bow for the truth. They stand in it. He demanded an apology. She had given him one. She had apologized for staying silent, for letting him make her feel small, for ever doubting the truth that had been screaming in her gut. And with that one, honest apology, she had burned his whole, carefully constructed world of lies to the ground. She had, in the end, kept her promise. She had made everything, finally, transparent.